Thanks be to God.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in thine eyes, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. I want to remind you that since the Episcopal Church in all its wisdom publishes the lectionary reading online, and you can therefore know what is coming, you should read these during the week. You should think about what you would say if you were given the opportunity, like Karen and I get, to speak about these words in front of others. Because today's readings, in particular, have a lot to teach us about God, and we can gain strength and purpose by reflecting on them often. In today's readings, in both the Old Testament readings and the Gospel reading, we are confronted by a God whose behavior we do not understand. Remember last week when Karen introduced us to the kingdom of keeping score, which feels so empty and pointless as compared to the kingdom of God, which feels like home for everyone, which feels like home for everyone, and no matter what we've done or left undone. The kingdom of keeping score. In Jonah, we watch Jonah love a bush more dearly than a city, and that city was the size of Roanoke. He loved that bush, and God reveals that God knows that the people of Nineveh are not faithful. He knows that the people do not know their right hand from their left, that they mix the profane and the sacred. God knows this. And God reminds Jonah and us that God understands us and yet forgives us and expects better things from us always. Always. And then in Exodus, which was the alternate reading for today, God brings quails in the evening and manna in the morning every day, 6 days a week. And who did he bring it to? He brought it to the bitterly complaining nation of Israel. God was faithful, but they wanted to be delivered to their promised land. And instead, what did God do? Even though they were hard-hearted and bullheaded, God fed them and helped them flourish there in the middle of the wilderness, and he made them learn to live dependent on God. So God reminds them and us that God gives us what we need, not what we think we want. We can find strength in that. In the parable, in the gospel, we watch a man who seems crazy. He gives away his wealth by paying everyone the same amount. And it was a denarii, a living daily wage. No matter when they started their work for him, no matter how much time they actually spent, no matter how much they got accomplished, he picked them up, took them to the vineyard, and paid them the same daily wage, enough for a day. Everybody got what they needed, no matter what they did. And through this parable, Jesus reminds his followers and us that God does not keep score, that he does not see whether we work hard or not. He does not see or care whether we show up or not at work. He doesn't care that we've earned or not. He gives freely to us. And there is strength and there is purpose in that, because the readings today show us that God is more forgiving, more loving, more generous than we can easily imagine. Each of these stories ended with someone saying, I cannot imagine how this goes. I would not have predicted that this is how God would behave. I do not understand who God is because he acts this way. And though we're not God, we are made in God's image. We have been created so that we can create, that we can wonder, that we can study, we can know, we can praise, and we can be in awe. And most importantly, we can love back. So since we can do all these things, and God is what God is, why do we also then find time to fret and worry, knowing that the kingdom of keeping score and the kingdom of me first is not satisfying. It's not what we're built for. The crown is heavy. The taxes are high. The land is dry and parched, and the justice is absent, and the oppression is great in those kingdoms. And God and Jesus showed us that we have a choice. But fortunately, as you guys know, since we're doing this together, we are not alone in this. And I don't mean incarnate. I do not mean Jesus incarnate or God with us. I mean, we are not alone. I am here with you. You are hearing my voice. I'm imagining your thoughts. I'm imagining what you want to do and want to have done. We are not alone. This weekend begins Rosh Hashanah, which means head of the year. In the Bible, it was known as Yom Teruach, which means shouting and blasting. The verse that calls for the people to remember this day commands them to shout a great shout. About what? In the Torah, in Talmud, the rabbis teach that this first day of the year, the first day of the rest of the year, is a celebration of us. It's a celebration of our humanity, of our taking up the mantle of being in God's world as active people, not as animals, but as images of God. And that's different. We have a role to play in God's world. Yom Teruach is where we get to say that we are ready and willing to begin again, to enter in. So this weekend, what would you shout? What great shout would you shout so that you could be heard by the kingdom of keeping score? What would you shout? What great shout would you shout? You know, it sounds a lot, that phrase sounds a lot like Dr. Seuss. And I thought when I wrote this right away, what great shout would you shout of the Who's from his book, Horton Hears a Who. Not the Who's from here, from Virginia, but the Who's who lived down in Whoville. And I hope you know the story where a kangaroo who comes from the kingdom of keeping score is about to boil the whole of Whoville, which is a tiny, tiny city built on a speck of dust. So think of Nineveh on a speck of dust, hanging over a pot of boiling oil. And this kangaroo from the kingdom of keeping score is about ready to let go. What great shout would you shout to save yourself, to be heard? So what did they shout? What great shout did they shout? They shouted, "We are here. We are here. We